After a fifth straight loss, the Phoenix Suns said what we've all been thinking. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll break down Mikal and Deandre's comments post-game about the mentality of this team, and I'll answer your questions about where the season goes from here. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Thursday. Thank you for joining us. If you're finding us for the first time, go ahead and hit follow or subscribe. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, we're everywhere. Make sure you don't miss a show Monday through Friday by hitting that button. If you're on YouTube, hit the bell down below as well. Get a notification when the show goes live. And drop me a comment with your thoughts on these Suns quotes from Kelly Ayton at The Athletic. That's where we'll start. I also have your questions to get answered. Lots to talk about. The losing continues. Once again, thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen here. Let me just dive right into it. So again, it was Kelly Ayton over at The Athletic. He's actually their Rockets reporter, but The Athletic has been doing a little bit of double coverage on some of these teams lately, and obviously the Rockets don't have a ton going on, and so he got a lot of really good stuff. You know, he covered Chris Paul in his Houston days. I'm sure that had part of it, but what Chris Paul said actually wasn't the most interesting thing. It was what Deandre Ayton said first and foremost. He's honest, right? We know that about Ayton. He's been the guy over this entire losing streak, whether it was after the I feel like even back to the Dallas and Boston games, he had some comments, but especially the dunk that Zion had. I'm thinking even of the Lakers situation when Beverly pushed him, and he's been very humble, been very honest, and it was not any different after this Houston game. Ayton said, quote, we could say a lot, but really, man, we just got to approach these games knowing that teams are coming to knock our head off our body. Defensive-wise, I just think we need to communicate more and play hard. We just got to be more connected. The teams we see on film aren't the teams we play. They're playing harder and with a chip on their shoulder against us. And look, I just looked it up before I hit record. The Suns are 29th in defensive efficiency over the past 2 weeks. That's per Cleaning the Glass. They keep the running tally of where teams stack up every couple of weeks, as well as overall season-wise. The Suns are down to 16th in defense over the course of the season now, and they're again at 29th just over the past 2 weeks. That pretty much encapsulates the entire losing streak because, not streak, but if you go all the way back to when they lost to Houston the first time, we're pretty much at 2 weeks from that. So an ugly stretch, and Ayton is putting words to that. Mikal said, quote, we just haven't been playing our way. He said, quote, it's adversity. We're losing, not playing well. You just got to keep going. The real you shows when times get tough. It's either you fold up or we go up. And I know the guys in this locker room and coaches know that folding is never an option. We just got to get ready. And I don't know, people, the quote that was been going around on social media has been the teams we see on film aren't the teams we play. They're playing harder and with a chip on their shoulder against us from DA. If you've been listening to this show, you know I'm not surprised to hear that at all. And I don't really know what the thing to make fun of him about or like clown him about or anything with that quote really is. Like, I don't know. I guess it's like we expect athletes to, we want to always ask for athletes to be honest, but never actually allow them to be. I think that's like kind of where I would classify this. But to me, it's refreshing to hear the players back up what we've all been thinking, right? Like what I've been saying all week. We just did a show. Aaron Edwards came on Tuesday's show, and we talked about why players and teams across the NBA just aren't scared of this Suns team anymore, right? Like, it's the truth. Teams aren't scared. And the season is starting to go sideways. And so when Ayton puts that idea out there basically saying teams are coming to play harder and with a chip on their shoulder compared to what they play against other teams. I don't know what the problem is. It's calling out what's obvious. You have to recognize that to pull yourself out of it as a player, as a team, whatever the case may be. I guess it's a part of it is, Ayton is a guy who maybe has contributed to that lack of focus at times, or he's not doing enough to get them out of it defensively, which he called attention to, which I just told you has been ugly lately. I guess there's an issue that, we'll do something about it rather than just talking about it, but that all feels like silliness to me. I appreciate the honesty. It's the same thing I said about Book getting more respect in the MVP race, which feels like a lifetime ago, might be a long shot now, but even Monty, I think you could put this in there of Monty saying at Media Day that he wanted a Crowder trade done preseason. Like, it seems to me that what a lot of NBA players and fans don't like about this Suns team is that it's like their quiet cockiness, if that makes sense. They talk, they puff out their chests a lot on the court or, in the court over the course of games at certain moments in the media, but then they always sort of have this way of hiding behind humility publicly, right? And in this case, look, we're seeing these guys wear their hearts on their sleeves, which is always going to be better, in my opinion. The Chris Paul quotes in that Athletic article were a little bit more like what I'm talking about in terms of that hiding behind humility. Like Chris Paul saying, seasons are long. We had a stretch last year where we won 18 in a row, and then we turned around and lost in the second round. What are we going to say at any one moment of the year? We're not going to overreact, which is like a very Chris Paul answer. But he's the same guy who is, getting into it with Jose Alvarado and whatnot too. So I prefer wearing the heart on the sleeve. I think in the long run, it's going to help you out. I think it's going to be mentally the best thing as an individual. If I'm Deandre Ayton, I'm the type of person where if I just speak it into existence, it's going to help me manifest and move forward with it. I think Mikal, is the same way. These guys are leaders on this team. And so even if we don't think of them that way as much, they're vets on this team. Monty pointed to a stretch in December of 2019 that they all went through together that was, I believe, 7 losses in a row. This is only 5. He said, we got out of that one. We can get out of this one. Them speaking this truth and owning up to the lack of focus, the lack of defensive intensity, the fact that teams are coming and kind of stealing their lunch, so to speak, like that all feels like what needs to be put out there. It would be kind of ridiculous to me if a player came out during this stretch and they were like, oh, we trust ourselves, we're hurt, Book's out, no big deal. Or, oh, teams should be really watching out because they're beating us now, but don't wonder if it's going to happen, when everybody's healthy. We're coming for you. Like, that would be ridiculous. It would be way more embarrassing. So in this case, they're telling the truth. I kind of think about it actually like Cliff Kingsbury with the Cardinals this season. I don't know how many of you are Cardinals fans. I am. He's just one example, but it feels to me like he's gotten more benefit of the doubt this season, whether it's because of the way that we're seeing him on Hard Knocks or in these press conferences. He's been the guy when he and Kyler have gotten into it, when the team has lost bad, he's been the guy to kind of own up to those bad moments in a way that he was in the past would have just been stoic or acted like nothing was wrong. And I don't think everybody's suddenly in love with Cliff Kingsbury, but I do think there's been a little bit of a tone change where it's like, you need that adult in the room. There's a certain point where the struggles get bad enough that you can't just come march out there and play dumb, play stoic, play humble, and expect that everybody's just going to gloss over it and allow you to go about your business without second guessing you. The second guessing is here for the Suns, and Deandre Ayton, Mikal Bridges, they're saying things we all know. They're saying things that I think they know that their teammates need to hear. They are thinking themselves and they need to internalize, and I think it'll help in the long run. I don't think this stretch is going to kill the season, but I also don't think going through this stretch and pretending like it's not a big deal would have been anything close to helpful. I want to answer your questions next. I got many, many questions from you guys. I really appreciate them. I have 5 or 6 listed here, so we'll dive into what the sale process and ownership change is affecting the trade market for Jay Crowder and more with this Suns team. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by ExpressVPN. We all know how ExpressVPN protects your privacy and security online, but here's something you might not know. You can also use ExpressVPN to unlock movies and shows that are only available in other countries. Maybe you've run out of stuff to watch on Netflix, and this will change your world. ExpressVPN allows you to binge, let's say, The Office in the UK version of Netflix, Friends in the UK version of Netflix, Rick and Morty on the Australian version. It's simple to do. Just sign into Netflix, fire up the ExpressVPN app, change your location to whatever country you need, refresh Netflix, and that's it. ExpressVPN lets you control where you want sites to think you're located. You can choose from almost 100 different countries and all of their Netflix libraries. But it's not just Netflix. ExpressVPN works with any streaming service. Hulu, the BBC iPlayer, YouTube, you name it. There are hundreds of VPNs out there, but we use ExpressVPN here on the Locked On Podcast Networks to watch our favorite shows because it's ridiculously fast, no buffering, no lag, and you can stream in HD without a problem. ExpressVPN also works on all your devices, so you can watch what you want on the big screen or on the go. So if you want to get access to hundreds of new shows, go to expressvpn.com/lockedon right now to get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. That's expressvpn.com/lockedon, expressvpn.com/lockedon to learn more. Today's show also brought to you by the NHTSA. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks, and suddenly a few becomes a few too many. The evening comes to an end and people start to head out, but you think of calling a ride and think, actually, never mind. You live nearby, you think you can make it home okay, maybe it's no big deal, but what are the odds you'll get pulled over? What's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, or maybe much worse. Maybe you total your car, maybe somebody gets deadly hurt. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence, and that's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, so we'll start with Chris Johnson at Chris J Stylist on Twitter. He asked, are the Suns handcuffed in the way of trades with the team being up for sale? He said he's heard a few times they won't really be able to take on bigger contracts or trade picks. So I want to start by answering your question, Chris, with a quote from Sam Garvin, the interim managing partner of the Suns. He gave an interview to Dwayne Rankin of the Arizona Republic. I'm hoping to have Dwayne on the show next week, but in the meantime, here is what Garvin said about this situation. It was related to Cam Johnson, but I think it's a pretty good insight. He said, I don't know why Cam kind of said that negotiations were negatively impacted by the unclear ownership situation. I, meaning Garvin himself, wouldn't need anyone's authority to do it, but I rely on James and our basketball operations staff to do all the negotiations and the numbers. So to me, that's a no, but obviously that could just be what he's saying. So rather than just taking him at his word, I think we can look at the actions of this organization recently and get some answers here. So first and foremost, the Suns have expanded their front office by quite a bit in recent months. This is all public. Go on to RealGM has a list. The Suns team website has a list. They've hired basketball analytics people, video coordinators, basketball operations, literally the operations department itself has grown by a few people. They just promoted James Jones to president of basketball operations, which I'm sure came with a raise. And on the business side, they haven't really slowed down. Not that these things are huge costs, but for instance, the investment in the Native community that they've done with the Originative Nights. They did Devin Booker's. They matched his commitment to his starting 5 group. They've done these small business diversity grants through First Bank of Arizona or whatever the sponsor's name is. All this while the team has been up for sale, all right? And that's not to mention during the period where the investigation was happening, they gave Devin Booker a supermax. They matched the contract for Deandre Ayton. They gave Monty Williams an extension. So that's all going on. That leads me to feel like the answer is not a flat out no, they can't do anything. And Garvin basically said that. But I do think there's a little bit of a difference between the two things of contracts versus picks. All right. On the one hand, with picks, I don't see why trading a pick would change the value of the team. And that's what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about moves that can't be made because it would change something about the financial situation now or going forward about this Suns team that would limit how much you could sell the team for, right? That's the bottom line. Why would trading a pick do that? I don't think it would. Because in theory, trading a pick is actually something you see teams do to be cheap, right? Like we've seen Robert Sarver, for instance. He got rid of the pick that became Rajon Rondo. He got rid of the pick that became Luol Deng. We know these stories, the Kurt Thomas trade, everything else. And what that allows you to do is potentially you can fill that top draft pick slot with a minimum player. You know, if the Suns are like the 4 seed in the West this year, 5, 6, whatever you think they're going to be, that's like a, 19th pick, 22nd pick, something like that. Those guys make more than the minimum. You could fill that slot with a 2-way player and not even fill that roster. Like, that doesn't actually save you money to keep a draft pick. So I think if you're talking about could the Suns trade a draft pick, I don't see what problems that would pose when it comes to selling the team. I don't get it. If somebody has a different answer, I would love to hear it. But I can't wrap my mind around why that would be the case other than just freeze everything. We're not touching any of it until the team gets sold, which maybe that's true, but I can't make any sense of it if it is. I do think, though, adding a more expensive player via trade could make a difference because the Suns are over the luxury tax going forward, depending on how they handle different moves, right? So that could be the case. If they, for instance, let's say Kevin Durant became available again, I could see, hey, we're taking on a $50 million type of player and he's going to make our bill in the future an extra $100+ million because we're going to be in the repeater tax, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, I could see that. But I don't think that's what we're really talking about right now. We're talking about a smaller trade related to Crowder. You get Kuzma, et cetera. These are not things that I think would be inhibiting. The Suns were also likely to be dealing with a crunch like that, no matter who owned the team, no matter what opportunities became available, because unless you're Joe Lacob or Steve Ballmer or Joe Tsai, you don't go into the repeater luxury tax over and over and over. It's just not something NBA teams do. So we would have been facing that down even if it wasn't Robert Sarver, even if there wasn't a new owner. If it was Joe Schmo from, who owns the Utah Jazz or whatever, it would have been the same exact type of thing. So I don't think the sale should change much, but we're hearing it a lot. That brings us to Dan's question. Dan at Generic Suns fan. If Phoenix can't trade picks until after the sale is final, what moves can we make to improve the season? Again, I don't feel like the Suns are prevented from trading picks. That said, it is going around, and it would look to me, if you're asking what the trade could look like, it would look a lot like the construction that we saw go around from Shams Charania this week that I'm sure many of you have seen. The Suns in that situation basically were trying to redirect what the Bucks were sending out for Jay Crowder to another team, in this case the Rockets, to try to get better players back. They didn't want Grayson Allen from the Bucks. They didn't want Serge Ibaka, Wes Matthews, Joe Ingles, which I don't blame them. And so they wanted Eric Gordon. They wanted Kenyon Martin Jr. And then they were going to send out some extra salary. I don't feel like that trade really made sense to me in terms of the Suns didn't seem to be giving up much of anything outside of Crowder and some salary filler, and yet they're getting the best 2 players in the trade. So I don't know how realistic that was in the first place, but that's kind of what you're looking at. In that case, the Bucks were going to be sending out 4 second-round picks, and they were going to be getting Crowder, and those 4 second-round picks were going to be going to Houston. So that's what you're looking at, something like that, if you're looking at a Crowder trade that doesn't involve a first-round pick from the Suns. Looking a little bit further with all of this in mind, Eugenius05 asked, even with Cam Johnson returning, the Suns being healthy, replacing Crowder with a decent role player, what do you think the ceiling is for the season? All right, quickly, guys, I just want everybody to keep this in mind. I get why this feels ugly. I'm on board with a lot of it. We'll talk about a little bit more of the schematic stuff in the next segment, a couple questions on that. But as a reminder, Boston last year was about 500 through the first half of the year. The Warriors, at one point in February, March, lost 9 of 11 games. You even look at this year. The Warriors are 500. The 76ers started 4-6 before they've gotten a little bit back on track. The Nuggets, who are playing a little bit better lately, but only really are 6-4 in their last 10, they have a 3-game losing streak recently. They only have a plus 1.2 point differential, and they're right behind the Suns in the standings. There is no dominant team. But the Suns also, I think it's truthful to say, don't have the star power to feel great about their chances as currently constructed. And so I think you have to pull them down a peg, and their championship odds are probably a little bit lower than the top group. But they also have a head start in the standings in terms of getting home court advantage. They have a roster and a system that makes sense, which again we'll talk about in a second. So it's probably somewhere below the top tier of contenders, but I still don't have them out. I'm not going to say because of one 5-game losing streak that they're never going to win a championship this season. So I think off the top of my head, you would want the Warriors, the Nuggets, the Sixers, Boston, the Pelicans in terms of generating offense through your star players in the postseason. I think you would want those teams. Milwaukee, you could go up or down because they don't have that traditional star power, but I would say Giannis is so good. And the Mavs, they just beat the Suns. So, that's already like a half dozen teams that I think you probably feel better about, but I don't think I have the Suns out of that slot either. Questions on scheme and productivity issues for this Suns team, starting with why they just cannot seem to get anything out of anyone not named Devin Booker. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Built Bar, our favorite. They are back. Can we pause the pod for a second? Great, because you got to try Built Bar's new reimagined flavors. There's 3 of them. Cookie dough, topper, coconut brownie bar, and a coconut brownie topper. You can also, for the holiday season, try the white chocolate peppermint granola. It's Built's take on the granola bar, so it's a little more filling than normal and insanely tasty as well. The candy cane brownie puff. Built Puffs are like biting into the universe's most delicious cloud, and they're crammed with protein just like every Built product. Built Bar is revolutionizing nutrition as we know it with 100% real chocolate, 17 grams of protein, and a astoundingly low number of sugar and calories. You're never cracking 10 grams of any of that. Really not more than 5 or 6 most time. 130 calories. So just sink your teeth into that first bite and it'll change your life forever. Try something for the holidays. Try those new reimagined flavors. Built. You got to try this. Get 15% off your order right now by using the code LOCKEDON15 at Built.com. Closing out the show with 2 more questions on the personnel and scheme stuff facing the Suns right now. Are they challenges? Are they issues? Or are we just watching a team that's out of sorts? I want to start with Onk at 2 to the 25. Beyond the injuries, he asks, beyond the injuries and the potential personnel issues that these last 5 games have shown, he put in parentheses the lack of shot creators and big wings, which I agree with. Is there a potential schematic issue that we are seeing? Or is this team just far too reliant on Book as a scorer, passer, and off-ball threat? All right, so I would say more than scheme, it's execution. Because to me, if there's anything we know works for Phoenix, it's that they can plug players into their scheme on both ends and get the most out of them. I don't think we need to doubt that at all, right? Whether it's the way that Deandre Ayton was night and day once he had a real point guard and a real offensive scheme for himself when Monty got here, or it's, some of the role players that have been able to really, really blossom. Dario Saric, Cam Payne, even Damian Lee. I would say Cam Johnson even probably falls into that. But that said, to return to the article that Kelly Iko wrote at The Athletic this week, he pointed out a couple clips where the Suns have just been giving up open three after open three to superstar creators off the bounce. Threes. Just Jason Tatum walking into an open off the bounce three. Pull up three. You had, I don't remember who the other clip was. I think it might have been Jalen Green in the Rockets game. And defensively, I think that does fit into a pattern we have seen. And if there is a schematic thing on the defensive end right now, it would be that. It would be, there's several examples over the past few years where you can say the Suns, when they aren't in, okay, we're fully going to be switching everything, or we're going to be drop coverage with Ayton in the paint against the pick and roll every time, or we're going to be in zone every time. They struggle to do the in-between stuff or shuffle between coverages or allow themselves to get uncomfortable. I mean, you don't have to look any further than the fact that we didn't see them mix defenses up against Luka Doncic, right? Like, to me, I was advocating for drop against him more often, make him take mid-range shots or pull up threes, which aren't things he necessarily loves to do. As long as you're not fouling him or allowing him to drive to the basket, I think you feel pretty good. And then when he did get isolated on a mismatch, they almost never doubled him. And so you saw Cam Payne, Chris Paul, Cam Johnson just getting bowled over like it was nothing, right? So that's an example. I think these pull-up three-point problems are another example. So, okay, that's there. But I think more than anything, it's execution. We've seen their drop coverage work. We've seen they drop and then they overhelp from the weak side, from, wherever they're selectively helping. Those things have worked for 2.5 years, right? Like, we don't need to overreact. I don't think that there's a major scheme issue. I think that there's a little bit of an execution issue. I also think size is a problem. They don't have the bodies to play the level of defense that they might want to. Imagine if at that power forward spot they had an Evan Mobley. I'm not saying that that's within reach for them or that that's like a standard you should be holding every team to have the best possible personnel. Like, yeah, wouldn't every team like to have Evan Mobley as a help defender, right? But like, they have instead Torrey Craig, or Jay Crowder, guys who are not that big, not incredibly athletic, and so you have problems. Offensively, I think they've built about just as good of a pick and roll system as you could hope for, right? Like, I think players outside of Book are just not good enough to do damage within that scheme consistently when the ball is in their hands. But I don't have much of an issue with the Suns pick and roll offense. I think any of the smart X's and O's people you pay attention to, they love it. We've all watched it. You've watched it. I've watched it. It generates great offense. And offense has not been the issue during this streak. I talked about how they're 29th the past 2 weeks defensively. They are still in the top 10 offensively, even during this losing streak. So not a problem. Not the problem. Last but not least, Laniel Makudu at Laniel. Is the Suns' lack of points in the paint and free throw attempts a scheme issue or personnel issue? He says, we seem to have athletic enough guys, but they don't get consistently past their defender and pressure the rim, whereas lesser teams like Houston do that with ease. I think you're right. You see Jalen Green get into the paint at will. He's frustrating the Suns, even though he's not like a difference-making superstar player at this point in his career. He's giving the Suns fits. He's getting to the line 12 times. Kevin Porter Jr. did that in the last game a couple weeks ago. And so, yeah, you watch a team that has way less experience, way less overall talent, and it does feel a little bit bizarre that they're able to do something that the Suns can't do. Why is that? I think to answer your question, Laniel, I feel like it is not actually scheme or personnel. To me, it's mindset. Because personnel-wise, scheme I just talked about. They have a great pick and roll system. On other teams, pick and rolls result in layups all the time. The Suns just don't do it that way. Again, to me, that's mindset. Personnel-wise, Bridges is about as ideal a foul drawing scorer on the wing as you could cook up in a lab. I mean, frankly, like, you look at guys like Paul George, Jason Tatum. Those guys, whether it's the regular season when they're at their peak or it's playoff time, they're at, 8-9 free throw attempts per game. Maybe they're a little bit stronger in their frame than Bridges, but still, Bridges is only at 2.3 per game at age 26. You have Deandre Ayton at about 3 per game since November 1st, which is promising. That's more than he has had in the past, but obviously it's not even close to the best bigs in the NBA, and it's not even as close as your best role men in the NBA, whether that's Rudy Gobert or Jared Allen. Those guys are often around 5 to 7 free throws per game because they're going up aggressively and they're drawing contact and they're getting to the free throw line. Even aside from those two, though, you have Chris Paul, who, since he's been a Sun, he never takes layups. He's not a guy you're going to trust to do that anymore, especially with how poor he's looked this season. And with Booker, you have a guy who was averaging around 15 or more drives per game. Obviously, it fluctuates game to game because we're still early in the season. But for the first couple of weeks of the year, he was somewhere around 15, 16, 17, 18 drives per game. Now, if you look on the season, he's only averaging 13.2, which would be a step up from last season. So credit where credit is due a little bit. But I don't feel like Booker is still not at a place where the defense is scared of him driving aggressively to the basket, absorbing contact, and getting to the free throw line. He's still not even at a career high in terms of free throw attempts per game. He is not at a career high, not even close to a career high in terms of free throw rate, which is just free throw attempts per shot attempt. So it's not coming from him either, right? Teams right now, they're not only sending doubles and blitzes at Booker and Paul, but just like the Dallas series, they're helping off of shooters at the same time. That basically kills off all of the aspects of what a pick and roll is supposed to do because Ayton can't get space to finish at the basket. The ball handlers aren't able to get through the meat of the defense. And so you just see this pinging around the perimeter, the ball just going around, and then somebody, lofts up a shot that's not a great one. When a great defense is really dialing in. Now, I said offense is still not the problem for this team, but it's also not at its best either. This is one area I do think the Suns could really miss Cam Johnson. Teams just wouldn't be able to help off of him the same way that they could Craig or Crowder, but still, it's a mindset thing to have your best players charge into the paint, finish, go up, absorb contact, and get easy shots, whether that is a layup or it's a free throw attempt. Those are the best shots in basketball, even in 2022. That has not changed, even with more threes, etc. And the Suns don't have enough guys who do that. It's bottom line. We've known it for a long time. And I don't think it's scheme. I don't think they don't have the right types of players, so to speak, in terms of physical. What are the attributes and where does everybody line up? I think it's mindset. It has to change. It has to. Otherwise, they're only going to be able to get somebody like, even if it's Kyle Kuzma, that guy's not fixing this problem. The best players have to adapt, change, be better, be different, and get them closer. That'll wrap us up for today. I'll be back tonight with a recap of the Clippers game. Appreciate you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Thursday. Enjoy the game. In the meantime, go make Locked On Sports Today your second listen here today. That show available on all podcast platforms. And I will talk to you all tonight.